Pulabunaka, and welcome to another episode of For the Record. I'm your host, Edwin Nand, sitting in for Pedeli Rokotivuna. He's unfortunately away sick and could not be here today. We hope he'll return soon. Also, our usual panelist, Nemani Ndela from the Fiji Sun, is away on official business, so he couldn't join us either. Now, I should point out that as per our intention on For the Record, to have an inclusive voice and a united voice from all the media, we had issued invites to individuals from other media organizations such as Jeffrey Smith from Fiji TV. We'd also invited Fred Wesley of the Fiji Times and Vijay Narayan from Communications Fiji Limited. Unfortunately, we've had no reply from Fred and Vijay as yet, but Jeffrey Smith, who was expected to be on the panel today, could not make it. He declined on the last minute. However, the show must go on, and it will go on. Today, we will speak to experts, some bureaucrats and senior government civil servants about the state of the economy. There's been a lot of claims and counterclaims, issues brought up in the public arena in the lead up to the elections. And for our voters, we want to bring you the facts, the situation as it is on the ground from, as they say, the horse's mouth. In studio with us, we have the Chief Executive of the Fiji Inland Revenue Authority, Fiji Revenue and Customs Authority, my apologies, Mr. Chitoko Tikulevu, the Permanent Secretary Finance, Mr. Filimoni Wangambada, and the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of Fiji, Mr. Arif Ali. He's filling in for the Governor who could not make it today. Gentlemen, thank you and welcome to For the Record. As I said earlier, a lot of talk about the economy and issues of VAT and debt have been brought up in recent days, and continuously so. Mr. Wangambada, I'll begin with you. What is the state of the Fiji economy right now, and is it as dire as it's being made to seem?
Thank you, Edwin. First of all, thank you for the invitation to be part of this For the Record show. I think we accepted this invite based on the fact that we would like to enlighten the members of the public about the current state of the economy. No, we don't have a lot of those opportunities where we have open forums to invite people and tell them how we have progressed economically. But I'm sure this show will allow us to talk about certain key economic indicators which will allow the public to judge a number of statements that are being made now regarding our economic performance. And that is the reason why we're here, basically to present the facts. And these facts on the economy are already published, whether it is the Reserve Bank annual report or the reports from FERCA and likewise Ministry of Finance. We have some of this information in our website and also publications. So the intention today, therefore, is to touch on key economic indicators which are currently being debated in public. And our intention, as I mentioned, is just to enlighten people. The choice is theirs, and they can also cross-check these stats that we are going to talk about against the published information, which I've referred to earlier. And on the economic performance, as had been highlighted, we just had a recent mission from the International Monetary Fund, and the Deputy Governor may be able to elaborate more about this. And they've acknowledged the consistent consistent economic growth that we are likely to see for the fifth year running this year in 2014, if we achieve the 3.8% growth on the top of the 3.6% growth that we achieved last year, and also the positive growth the years prior. So they've acknowledged the fact that we have rebound, and we have rebound quite strongly, but at the macro, in terms of national target, we've always stated in our publications that we would like to go for 5% growth, and that is where we're heading. And we would like to see sustainable growth towards that rather than erratic. And overall, there are other key indicators such as investments, so that the government may be able to talk about those. And from the financial side, I can also say that we are on a stronger footing now in terms of management of government's financials. And that is reflected in the level of deficit and debt, which I can talk about later. But overall, I think our economy, not only acknowledged by the businesses here and likewise individuals, but even international institutions such as the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank. They've talked about the fact that given the constraints that were imposed on us during the period 2007 to 2013, we were able to come out strongly as an economy.
That's an interesting point I'd like to come back to. But Mr. Ali, there was a mention of an IMF delegation that came in. What were their indications? How are they finding our economy right now?
Thank you, Edwin. Maybe first of all, let me start with, most people do not understand when you talk about GDP. What does GDP actually mean? GDP in simple terms means the income of all the people of the country. So, when we said GDP will increase by 3.8%, it simply means on average, the incomes of all the people in Fiji will increase by 3.8%. And when we say 3.8%, it's adjusted for inflation. So it's in real terms when you talk about, growth in the economy. And the second thing that I'd like to state on the economy is that Reserve Bank is the only entity in Fiji that has a pool of almost 30 very trained and experienced economists that talk about or analyzes the economy. There's no other institution in Fiji that analyzes the economy as thoroughly as the Reserve Bank does. So when we release our numbers, it's based on people who have a lot of expertise in the area of the economy in terms of analyzing, and therefore our numbers are thorough. It's backed by data and backed by facts. So on the economy, this year we project the economy to grow by 3.8%, as the Permanent Secretary of Finance has said, and this growth is also supported by IMF. The mission was here for the last 2 weeks. They met the Reserve Bank, they met FECA, they met a lot of government agencies, they also met the private sector, and based on their assessment, the economy will grow or accelerate to 3.8% this year. And I think the most important thing about this growth is that for 2 consecutive years now, we will be growing at above 3%. The last time the Fiji economy grew for 2 consecutive years above 3% was in 1990 and 1991. 1989 and 1990. So it's almost 25 years since the last time we grew for 2 consecutive years above 3% growth. The key indicators that we monitor in the Reserve Bank is, one is growth, and as I said, we are going at above trend. That is the jargon that IMF used, that is above our historical average. The second is in terms of foreign reserves. Foreign reserves right now is just below $1.7 billion, enough to cover 4.5 months of import cover. But in addition to the reserves that we hold of 1.7 billion, there's approximately $750 million worth of foreign reserves that is held by FNPF, some insurance companies, and government offshore. So if you combine all these foreign reserves, our total foreign reserves is a record $2.5 billion, enough to cover more than 6 months of import cover. The other macroeconomic indicator that we closely monitor is inflation. Our inflation as of June this year is 1.1%, and that's by world standard is very low. In the past couple of years, our inflation has been slightly higher, and that has been driven by higher commodity prices like fuel prices and food prices.
Mr. Ali, unfortunately, it's time to take a very quick break. We'll let you continue with that. We'll be back straight after the break. Welcome back to For the Record. We will continue with our discussions. Before the break, Mr. Ali, you were talking about inflation levels. What significance does it have to everyday Fijians?
Well, for all central banks in the world, including the Reserve Bank, one of the key objectives is price stability or maintaining inflation at low levels. Ultimately, if prices are too high, people will not be investing. And if inflation, central banks try to maintain inflation at low levels, and that is always supported by government. As I said earlier, inflation right now is 1.1%. A few years ago, inflation was slightly higher, hovering between 3 to 5%. And this increase in inflation over the last couple of years was mainly driven by external factors. So if you look at commodity prices like crude oil prices, just before the global financial crisis, that went off the roof, and prices were almost 100% higher than what it was a few years earlier. I look at food prices. So when commodity prices like crude oil prices or fuel prices goes up, all other commodity prices also go up. Things like food, because transportation cost goes up. So one of the things that you will notice, and we monitor the receiving very closely, is the food index. Food index has grown by almost 70 to 80% over the last 5-6 years. Price of dairy has also gone up by in excess of 100% over the last 6 years. The price of wheat has also grown up quite strongly over the last 4 or 5 years, and that is partly driven by the increase in prices of fuel, and also the very strong New Zealand and Australian dollar recently.
Interesting point you made about the price of food as corresponding to price of fuel or crude oil. Does that explain why some of the basic food items or everyday items have seen an increase in prices over the years? A classic example would be, as you mentioned, milk, butter, Mr. Wangambada, some other basic items. Even though they're zero rated or on the basic items list, the prices have increased over the years.
Oh, yes, I think CEO Furka can talk about the duties that we have on these basic food items to try and cushion the impact of those price increases, particularly if they are imported. And we have that element to consider. Some are domestic factors which can push price up, but as the Deputy Governor mentioned, most of the price increases we are seeing now are externally induced, given the exchange rate movements, and likewise the increasing prices in commodities, whether it's food or fuel. But we do certain we implement certain policies domestically to ensure that those goods remain affordable, particularly the basic food items. And apart from that, some of the broad policies that we had introduced to try and cushion the impact includes the change in the threshold for our tax. We move from 8 to almost 16,000 now, and likewise the social welfare schemes that we have to target certain sectors of the economy that are probably seen to be disadvantaged. And we've expanded the social welfare scheme over the years, and we've brought in the free education, free bus fares, and those complement some of the tax policies that are in place, and these overall should try and dampen the price increases that we are likely to face, that is externally induced and which we have no control over. So we have to work on the elements that we can control, and that is why we have introduced, government have introduced these policies to help make the goods affordable.
Mr. Tekolevu, the issue of VAT has been very topical these days. A lot of people are saying time to reduce VAT after elections. VAT's too high, and prices of goods are expensive because of VAT. Is that true?
Maybe I'll just start by saying that SPS Finance is alluded to, as we all know, the basic food items and kerosene. There is 0% VAT. It's zero rated. It's been there for a number of years now. But if most of these are imported anyway, the issue really is the loading of cost, manufacturing cost, the shipping and all that, that continues to escalate in the pass from abroad. And that's why outside our control anyway. So when it's landed here, the landed cost has already been high. Over the years, the cost continues to increase. So in other words, the 0% VAT, it's still in a way redundant, if you like. Whether it goes up to 20%, the VAT goes down to 10%. These basic food items are zero anyway. So whatever changes we make to the rate, it will be very, very insignificant, if you know, by and large. So just to complement what PS Finance has also said, from expenditure side from government, they've looked at other social policies to dampen the pricing, if you like, of those goods. The duty rates, you know, over the past we used to have almost 18 bans for imported commodities. Now it's only 4, and the rates have gone down from 32. Most of the goods have gone down from 32 to 0 in successive budgets in the last 3-4 years. The fiscal reform made by government to ensure that some of these prices can be controlled and also be minimized. the goods that are almost used every day by consumers, goods that are used by manufacturers, goods that are used for processes, by processes, raw materials even. Raw materials are never zero, never, never. So in the last 2-3 budgets, the government has seen that raw material is critical, to make it for zero in certain manufacturing processes. So there's a lot of other things that are done, not specifically looking at the VAT, but the other complement policies introduced by government to try and look at the price. Hopefully this can be cascaded down to consumers in terms of the so not directly just looking at VAT, but looking at the other duties. The import fiscal duty, there's excise duty, and there's VAT that are imposed. So if all of these 2 other duties, apart from VAT, is reduced to zero, there's only VAT we're talking about here. So I think we have to look at this whole importation thing and the VAT tax issue holistically, taking into account what government has in terms of reforms.
So what would the impact be if VAT were reduced to say 10%? Are you saying that it's too simplistic to look at it that way?
Yeah, my understanding of VAT, how it works, is that the impact will be very, very small, very, very, very insignificant, if you like. The prices, the goods that we use most of the time, the basic price is already zero, but yet the price continues to increase, every year. Particularly if the goods are, and we see all the goods that are coming in, the price are always been noted that it continues to escalate in the past. So some of the goods as well are coming in duty free. Most of the goods under the trade agreements. So the price continue to rise, but the duty it is landed here duty free as well because of the MSG, for example. And yet the price continues. So I think this is a challenge really for the retailers, for the wholesalers, the private sector people that are engaged in handling these goods.
Yeah. Is there any reason for me to get excited if somebody tells me, look, I'm going to reduce your VAT by 5%? Is it reason to get excited?
I am not excited. Based on how VAT works. Because when a particular container comes through, how the goods are shared within the contents of the container, and then VAT is on top of the goods that are part of that container. It's shared amongst the goods individually. Now goods are coming not only one full container of the same goods, but now are shared. There's cars, there's fridge, white goods and all in that. So the VAT portion, if you like, when it's imposed, is properly shared. So when it comes to the final consumer, it's very, very small. Very, very insignificant.
On that, it's time for another break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to For the Record. Some interesting discussions about the Fiji economy and fiscal policies in VAT. Before the break, we were speaking with Mr. Chitoko Tikolevu about VAT. Mr. Tikolevu, you explained that there's a whole lot more in going to the supermarket and in buying anything. It's got more to do with than just VAT. So if say, for example, somebody's sitting at home and watching right now, and they're thinking that it doesn't make sense because VAT is charged on everything. We're not just talking about basic food items, but every single commodity in Fiji. And for you to say that it's not going to make a major impact doesn't really quite ring true. I mean, how would you explain that?
It's true. And what I'm saying, because if you reduce it to 10 or 13%, the final consumer of that can of fish or that commodity you're going to buy, it's small. It's very, very insignificant in my view. Given the spread, if it's important item, the spread that is individually being met by individual items that are part of that consignment coming in. So when it comes to 10% VAT, it's very, very small in my mind when you calculate per dollar per commodity in that container. When the thing is spread out in terms of VAT portion, the cost of VAT, the 10%, or whatever the VAT rate that is being decided by government. So that's the holistic view of looking at this whole VAT debate.
If there were to be a reduction in VAT by 5%, how much revenue would the government stand to lose on a year?
It's close to 300 million. Now, the issue really here, that's one issue, looking at consumers, what the consumer will pay, increase or decrease. But the bigger issue is really where the government will get 300 million. That's the challenge. Are they going to increase the duty rates? Are they going to increase corporate tax rate, the personal income tax rate. One thing that the government done in terms of this fiscal reform is to empower people, empower business to make more profit, empower people to have more home pay, and they go and spend or reinvest or whatever. And then we as tax collectors, we are again collecting and give it to government to meet their social needs, social obligations to the community. So our revenue base is very small in terms of taxes, very, very small. We don't have the luxury of mining, only water coal and probably one in olive. Other than that, there is basically zero, and water, resource tax. But other than that, our revenue base is very small. Now, we are also obligated in terms of our trade agreements. MSG agreements will direct us, given our obligation to that. All these commodities and trading amongst the members will be done through 0%. Whether we like it now, EPA is coming in, as well as PICTA. They are saying that PICTA will follow the European Union negotiations that is almost being finalized now. Now, all these things will go to zero. Where will the revenue come from for government in the future when this kicks in, 2016, 2015, 2016? So the government has been laying out properly what to expect in the future, and some of the precautionary measures are done now, looking at white goods, the sin goods, spirits, and all that. So in anticipation of the trade agreement's obligations.
Where does the majority of the VAT income come from? What are the major items or sectors of goods that attract VAT and collections by FIRTA?
Yeah, it's basically on Chapter 87 of the HS, which is vehicles. One is, second is trucks, vehicles, or buses, cars, and all that. Oil, import bill on oil is quite big as well. Those two are the ones that, and the other ones are manufacturing, raw materials, machineries. Machineries, as you know, are expensive, whether it's manufacturing or for roads and all that. A lot of machines are coming in now. So one machine can fetch, because of the cost of the machines, VAT on that is expensive as well. Now, during negotiations, we are always partnering Ministry of Trade and Ministry of Finance, making sure that asking all these our trading partners during negotiations to make sure these high dutiable items are, if you like, negative list. But we have no negative list to try and exclude them. But the rest is okay. The higher, lower dutiable items, but then of course the trading is incoming of those commodities are not high as this Chapter 87, Chapter 84.
Mr. Wangambada, if there were to be a VAT reduction, a loss of $300 million in revenue, what impact would that then have on government spending?
Thank you, Edwin. As we know, the focus on government right now has been to build up the infrastructure. So capital, if you look at our budgets for this year and likewise previous year, there's been a lot of focus towards capital projects. And this is likely to be the area that will be affected should revenue be foregone through reduction in VAT. If it turns out to be 300 million, we'll have to look for, if we want to maintain the same momentum on infrastructure development or capital projects, then we'll probably have to expand the base, which the CEO of FIRTA is talking about, which means we may have to reverse some of the tax reforms that we had announced in the last two budgets or last three budgets. And that itself will have its impact on the economy, on investors, the fact that we are bringing back some of the things that we had done away with to do through the reform. So not only will we lose revenue, we will have to expand the base. We may have to increase the certain tax categories, as been stated by the CEO, including your income tax. So you may not take home more than what you are experiencing right now. So it's those factors. And then our concern is we are going through a phase now from budget side where we would really like to improve our infrastructure. Because when we improve our infrastructure, that itself has a bearing on the private sector, on the businesses. When you have proper infrastructure, they are encouraged to invest and it also attracts investment, it reduces the cost of doing business, it opens up other opportunities. So if we would like to maintain that momentum, then we will have no choice but to increase certain taxes that we had reformed. And may I add, Edwin, during this period of reform, I know the international commentators, economic commentators, they used to wonder how come we had reformed our tax system during the trying, the period, the difficult period that we went through. Difficult in the fact that there was not no engagement by our development partners and also by multilateral institutions, because they did not, they wanted to wait until election happens. So during that 7-year period, we were left to really fend for our own, and then we look at other regions to form relationships with. So normally economies wouldn't touch their tax. They would want to move it in the other direction, increase their taxes, because there's no support coming from outside. We went in the other direction. Despite those challenging no engagement periods, we reduce our tax, we reduce our form. And apparently we collected the highest revenue ever during those tax restructure, tax reform. So these are the creative policies that we needed to bring in order to sustain the economy. And I think the growth that we are seeing now is due really to those tax reforms that we undertook, and that has stimulated the economy. So not only are people spending their disposable income and investing, but we've also seen investment go up, and this is really driven by private sector investment. The Deputy Governor may talk about that later. So those, so we've seen consumption spending, we've seen businesses are realizing more sales of their goods and products, and they in turn are also investing. So it has brought out a good feeling amongst not only consumers but businesses, and I think together we are growing the economy towards the direction that we would like to see.
With that, we'll take another break. When we come back, we'll take a quick question to the Reserve Bank about taxes and VAT. We'll be right back. Welcome back once again to For the Record. As discussions have been going, VAT and VAT reduction has been one of the topical issues during this lead up to the elections. A lot of politicians are talking about it. Today we get to find out some facts about VAT and what would happen if there is to be a reduction. Mr. Ali, from the Reserve Bank's point of view, would you recommend that we sustain current VAT levels or decrease it or increase it?
As I highlighted earlier, inflation or price stability is one of the objectives of the Reserve Bank. So we monitor what happens to prices, whether VAT increases or decreases. So if there's a reduction in VAT, it will result in a slight reduction in prices. But as the CEO of FECA said, most of the food items do not attract any VAT. So when you reduce VAT, it would not really result in a reduction in VAT for the basic food items. Of course, there will be reduction in prices of other items. So when you look at the total consumer price index, inflation will fall slightly. At the end of the day, it is the the politicians will ultimately have their say in terms of what, or the government that comes in place in terms of where they want VAT to be. And of course, it is a challenge and the advice of Minister of Finance and FECA then to advise the government in place on the pros and cons of reduction or increase in VAT. So I leave it to them in terms of, because it's in their domain.
All right, let's talk about investment. So far as I understand it, investment levels have been increasing and are steady on the ground, but we get to hear that there is no investment and the economy is being propped up by public spending. All the growth that we are seeing right now is because the government is carrying out all this infrastructure work, taking out huge loans to sustain these projects, and it won't last. It's very short term. I want to hear on that from you, Mr. Mangambada.
Perhaps then we'll let Arif talk about the investment bit, and then I will talk about the be spending on infrastructure.
All right. Mr. Ali, is it public spending that's propping up our economy?
Well, as I highlighted earlier, I think there are a number of macroeconomic indicators that businesses look at, investors look at. And I spoke about one is the economic growth. For 2 consecutive years, we are going to grow above 3% that we have not seen for the last 25 years. We're going to grow for 5 consecutive years. That's something that we have not seen for the last 20 years. So on the economic front, things are very positive. Inflation, as I highlighted earlier, is down to 1.1%. Our foreign reserves are very comfortable at 4.5 months of import cover. The other key indicators are investment, employment, how sound is the financial system, our banks, the private sector credit is a very important indicator. And let me start off with investments. All governments in Fiji have had a target of 25% investment to GDP target. And if you look at data, there have been only in 2 instances, one in the 70s and 80s when the Monasava and large the capital works on road projects were being done when we achieved the target. The second was in 1999 when a lot of large hotel construction has been done at Danarau. Now for last year, our investment to GDP was 29%. That's a record of 29.2% investment to GDP. This year, our estimate right now is investment to GDP is about 26%. So for 2 consecutive years, we have investment above 25% target. So when people say that our economy is driven by consumption, that's not true. It's driven by consumption and investment. The second most important thing is that when you look at the components of investment, private sector investment accounts for 15% of the 26% this year. So that means private sector investment is very strong. It's not driven by government per se, but it's driven by a lot of private sector. And when we at the Reserve Bank break down the private sector component of things, we look at it that almost 2/3 of this private sector investment is our local businesses. And one of the things that we are hoping that, after elections, after having a stable government after elections, we will see a lot more foreign direct investments. So right now, it is our local investors or local businesses that are investing and they account for a sizable amount of investment. The other area to validate whether investment is very strong is to look at bank credit numbers. Last year, new loans that the banks gave us in excess of $1.4 billion. That's almost a 62% increase compared to 2012. We always
these are commercial investment loans.
Yeah, this is total bank loans given to the private sector. So this is the private sector loans that were given to the private sector. So the private sector is borrowing, and when you borrow, you don't save, you don't put that in a savings account. You borrow and you spend immediately, either to buy a car, buy a house, or invest in your buildings and so forth. This year, for the first 6 months of this year, we've seen new loans grow by almost 930 million. Again, a very strong growth in new borrowing, and a large amount of this new borrowing is going to investment. Of course, some of it is going to consumption, but it's going to an investment also. So when you look at investment indicators, they're very strong. And just to add on, the Reserve Bank does a business expectation survey. And there's 2 specific questions that we are asked in our surveys. What is your outlook in terms of new plant and equipment, and what is your outlook in terms of building? And the response that we've got in our latest survey is that 75% of the respondents are saying over the next 12 months, they will invest in new plant and equipment. 1 in 2 businesses are saying they'll invest in new building over the next 12 months. So when you look at these indicators, they are very strong. And this is also supported by imports of investment goods. Imports of investment goods is growing in excess of 20%. It grew very strongly last year, and again, it's growing very strongly this year. So investment is very strong, and it is not only government that is driving investment, but also private sector and somewhat some of the statutory corporations like FEA.
If we were to give a sort of comparison of the different areas of investment, where would you say is the biggest growth area right now?
Investment in, from government it's on roads, from the private sector it is in building and construction, manufacturing, tourism sector, and the Airport Fiji Limited is also doing some upgrade for the airport, so it's also there. And Fiji Electricity Authority is doing some capital works also. And I'm sure you also heard that the telecommunications company, Mobile Vodafone, is spending almost $50 million in investment. B-Mobile is spending somewhere around close to $70 million. So it's both, as I said, it's not just government, but a lot of it is private sector also.
Mr. Wangambada, is government spending propping up the economy?
Okay, thank you, Edwin. I'll take us back to in the year 2012 when we were designing the budget and having discussions with our minister and those that were involved in budget formulation. We realized at that point that the prior years, government has been the one that is driving economic growth through its investment, infrastructure, building roads, building schools, jetties, and hospitals and the like. So there was a need to also bring in the other factors that help economic growth. And then there are a number of areas that you can induce to support growth, and one is consumption. Consumption, the other area is investment. This is apart from government driving growth. So you have consumption, you have investment, you have government, and then the other portion is your trade performance. And all those combined can influence how you grow. So as I mentioned, 2007 up to 2011, those have been, apart from the effect of the financial crisis, government has been putting in a lot of spending. Again, going back to what I stated earlier, there was no engagement from others. So come 2012, we thought that it is time now to bring in the other elements to help support government. And that's when we did the restructure to tax. We lowered the tax rate. We increased the threshold subsequent years, and that put more disposable income to consumers. And we, given the need to catch up, given the prior years, people spend. And when people spend, that becomes the consumption that we saw in the economy. And when people spend, the investment is likely to go up as well, because as I said, the businesses began to see their sale, their turnover increase as well. So we've brought in the other element, consumption and investment. As Deputy Governor mentioned, the private sector is the major contributor to that increase in investment as a percent of GDP. It went from, I think, 4% to 15 now, almost 16% now. So see, because consumers had spent, investment has also increased, so that added to the growth that we are seeing now. So it's not only driven by government expenditure, basically on infrastructure, but also by consumer spending and also investment level. And there's some work that we're still doing on our trade performance. We all know that our imports is still higher than our exports, and that's why government has brought in programs such as the import substitution, whether we can substitute some of the things that we are buying from abroad, and that's why we are encouraging Buy Fiji Made, Ministry of Industry and Trade, and we urge members of the public buy Fiji Made, because in doing so, you are helping us to address the imbalance that we are seeing between imports and exports. And the third one is our national export strategy, which government continues to work on, to try and bridge that gap there.
What do you say to people who say that there are no strong economic policies to take Fiji into the future? These are all short-term, and once all this increased government spending is complete, all this infrastructure work is complete, the economy will have nowhere to go.
Well, that would be my reply, that when we look at the components that drives the growth of an economy, we are on track with almost 3 of those. Government continues to spend and will continue to spend on infrastructure, because there's still a lot of catching up to do in terms of our infrastructure maintenance, and likewise create new roads so that there is easy access. We had reports, studies done previously on the status of our infrastructure, not only during this period here, but prior. And we note that even at that point, the experts were talking about the need to attend to our infrastructure, but we were moving on them slowly, and that is why we still have some way to go in terms of infrastructure development. Hence, our budget would still be focused on, directed towards more infrastructure work. Hence, the portion of budget will continue to increase towards that. So that not only supports investment, but the fact that our policies, other policies, tax policies have also brought in the other elements of consumption and investment, and we are working on trade. And once we are able to address those areas, that will allow a more sustainable economic performance. People doubted the fact that we would even be growing by the 3.8% that we're seeing now, or the 3.6% growth. I know, because we've been working at Reserve Bank and finance, people always thought that we would grow at 1%, even with support coming from them, 1% or lower. And yet we've defied that. We've grown above that, and at 3.6 and 3.8, basically due to the economic policies that we've brought in at this time.
All right, Mr. Wangambada, we will take another quick break. There are more discussions to be held, more issues to talk about. We'll be back after a short break. Welcome back. This is For the Record. The topic today is the economy, VAT, and possibly the elections, and what politicians are saying in relation to Fiji's economy. Now, before the break, we had a detailed explanation from the Finance Ministry on what the investment plan in Fiji is and what sort of changes we're seeing on the ground. Now, I have a question for you, Mr. Dikolevu. All of what has just been explained to us is basically showing that there's a lot of spending going on. Now, whenever there's investment, there are expenses related. When consumers spend, there's also a tax angle to it. If this all were to not happen or not increase, as has been explained, what would happen to revenue collection? Because revenue collection is, of course, tax-based. If you don't have these levels of investment, government spending and consumer spending, and I think somewhere around $900 million in loans, where do you get your money from then?
No, thank you. Some very unusual trend we are facing this year, in the last 12 months. There's always a direct correlation between the economic growth and we as tax collectors in terms of revenue performance, revenue collection. The unusual trend is unprecedented. So for the first 7 months of this year, we are above forecast by almost 80 million Fijian dollars revenues. Never happened before. The trend, if it continues, if there is no natural disaster between now and 31st December, we will be really shooting close to 2.1 billion. The forecast this year is only 2.039, but we are already doing some analysis. And this is just a direct reflection of how strong the economy is, the private sector, the consumption particularly. The VAT collection is very, very strong. And also assisting the VAT collection is just a reflection of investment, buying of properties, selling of properties, houses, lands. It's also a reflection on a strong collection of capital gain tax and stamp duty. It's huge. The collection also coming through capital gain, stamp duty. And of course the others, departure tax collection. The trend is going down, but still above forecast at the moment. So it's unprecedented, the trend we are already seeing, and it's a direct correlation, reflection of what is in the economy where we are today. And again, reconfirm the fact that if the trend continues, we might hit close to 2.1 billion come 31st December, barring no disaster, flooding or hurricane.
Well, that's up to Mother Nature, but it seems there's a lot of confidence out there, would you say?
Absolutely. It's a lot of confidence. It's just a reflection of direct reflection of that. Businesses are investing, they're paying on time, they're lodging on time as well. And a lot of other things that are happening behind the scene by our team at FOCA. But first and foremost is the economy. That's true. In the past, we've been saying that when the economy is strong, revenue collection automatically fits in. And buoyancy in our revenue collection is always a direct result of how economy is, whether it's strong or not strong.
Now, also related to the economy is government loans, lending. There's been a lot of talk. I've heard people say that Fiji is running out of money and very soon we'll be sold to China. We're going bankrupt. Is that true? Is that anywhere near true?
Thank you, Edwin. The short answer is it's not true at all. And I'll try and provide some explanation on this topic of debt. We, as the Ministry of Finance, we've been a bit concerned when we see the numbers that have been floated. One is maybe 5 billion debt, the fact that we are about to lose our sovereignty and sold to another country, which is not going to happen. I think the Deputy Governor had talked about levels of reserves, so that shows the strength of our financial situation in Fiji. And I will talk now about our debt position. In 2013, we closed the year 2013 with a debt of about 3.8 billion. And in 2006, it was around 2.9 billion. And the 3.8 billion equates to about 51.4 as a percent of GDP. So this is the indicator that people normally use when they talk about debt. What is it as a percent of GDP? So 51.4% of GDP as at 31 December last year. And you compare the debt level to other major economies such as the US is about 100% of GDP, UK is about 100%, and Japan about 200%. And I could cover other European economies, and their debt is much, much higher than that. So, but for us, the target is for us to move towards 45% of GDP, and that's captured in our government documents, that in the medium term, we would like to move towards 45% of GDP. This 51.4% that we have last year, if we include the sinking fund that we have saved abroad, government has saved abroad about US 130 million now in preparation for the bond that will mature in 2016, about US 250. We would like to pay that, hence we've been parking funds abroad. But if we were allowed to redeem some of those bonds right now and pay off the US 130 million, using the US 130 million, then our ratio would fall from 51.4 last year to about 48.4. So we would have been on track towards that 45% that we are aiming for. So that level is basically that it is not 5 billion or 10 billion that people have said it is, but we've borrowed less than the prior period when we compare 7-year periods, 2007 to 2013, 2000, 2006. When we compare these two periods, we have borrowed less, and I will not talk about the impact. People are there to see for themselves what the impact has been. I think we've borrowed less by about 500 million compared to previous 7-year period. And we've seen more capital investments and more projects, more schools being opened, I think hospital. So I think it's for people to judge what the impact has been, about borrowing more during the prior 7 period and borrowing less during this period, and what the impact has been. And the other issue that I would like to raise is on the borrowing amounts. During this period 2007 to 2013, our average, if we annualize the borrowing, it's about 155 million. Compared to the previous 7-year period, it's about 200 million per year, if we were to take it per year. So, as I said, we borrowed less, but seems to have done more with that amount. And again, this is coming from our vision as the ministry is a prudent stewardship of government resources. We want to make sure that the resources we get are directed towards useful means which can itself create investments and then helps in the growth of the economy. The other area that I would like to talk about is on the deficit, because I think people just focus on debt, and debt is a result of the deficit that we put in the budget. So if your deficit is likely to be higher, then that means you will have to borrow more, so your debt increases. We assess the deficit that we have incurred from 2007 to 2013. It has averaged about 1.6% deficit from 2007 to 2013. That is the lowest deficit when you go back in history and compare 7-year periods. That is the lowest that we have ever achieved. From 1970 to 2013, 7-year brackets. You go backwards, and these are published information.
Mr. Ogumbada, I'm going to have to pause you there slightly, but we will continue with that explanation. We will take a very quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to For the Record. We're almost nearing the end of the show, but for now discussions continue. Before the break, PS, you were explaining the deficits, so at 1.1%
average.
Yes. For quite a long time. Yeah. What does that mean to Joe sitting in Nambua?
Yeah. Thank you, Edwin. I referred to the deficit level. When we do the budget every year, we look at our revenue collection that is done by FERCA, and then we see what other sources of inflows would come in apart from the tax and tax component. And then we set up the expenditures of government, of all of government. And then we match these two. And if our expenditure is higher than revenue, it means that we have a deficit, and that's what I'm referring to here. But I will cover another element later, which is on the operating bit. Well, I'll probably talk about it now. Our operating revenue, which means tax collection and others, is sufficient to meet our operating expenditure, wages, salaries, operation of government. But any borrowing, which means any borrowing that we do, are all directed towards capital projects, infrastructure development. Our borrowing is not taken to finance the operating bit, which means wages, salaries. No. If you look on our published statistics, you will note that in the last 7 years, our savings that we have between operating expenditure and operating revenue, it has gone like that. It has increased compared to previous periods when we had a very low savings or none at all. So it has widened. So I could show you the graph later, which means that our revenue is sufficient to meet our whole operation of government. And any borrowing would be just for capital purposes. So when we match during this budget period, when we match our total revenue and operating, we see that there is a gap, and that becomes the deficit. And that deficit is then financed by borrowing. That's what I referred to earlier. When for last year, we had targeted, our forecast was a deficit of about 2.6 or 2.7%. Our actual was 0.5, deficit of 0.5. And the year 2012 it was minus 1.1. And 2011 about minus 1.4. And that's what I said, referred to. When we take those average deficit, during 7-year blocks, the last 7 years has been the lowest compared to from 1970 to now, which means that we are borrowing less as a result. And that's how it links to the debt level. So we borrowed less during that 7-year period, and as I said, it's for the people to say whether that lower borrowing, what the impact has been. People would have seen the evidence of what has been done with the funds that were borrowed.
Mr. Ali, government borrowings from the central bank's perspective, has it been prudent?
Well, one of the things that Reserve Bank very closely monitors or advises government is in terms of government's borrowing requirement. And one of the things that most investors look at is what is our debt to GDP ratio, in which the PS has said, what is the deficit levels. So if the higher the deficit level that government has, the more that government borrows, it ultimately has an impact on how we do things at the Reserve Bank. And this has implication on our objectives of inflation and foreign reserves. So if the government borrows more, and particularly if it borrows more from domestically, what it means is ultimately when it spends, we are a small open economy, we import a lot of things, our foreign reserves will fall. Or there could be upward pressure on interest rates, and there's little funds by the private sector to borrow from the domestic markets. So one of the things that we've seen, and which the PSF has highlighted really is the average deficit over the last 7 years has been low. Particularly in the last 3-4 years has been much lower. So this has really helped us in terms of a monetary policy, in the sense that when they borrow less, there's less pressure on foreign reserves. So that's that's why you see a upward trend in our foreign reserves, which is 1.7 billion is what we have overall of 2.5 billion. So that doesn't put pressure on our foreign reserves because they're not spending and it's going into it. The second most important thing is that I thought is important to state is that the mix of capital and operating expenditure has been very good. So these are all going to productive. A significant amount is going to productive purpose. 36% of the expenditure is going to productive purposes or investment, and somewhere around 64% is going to operating expenditure. So this mix of capital and operating expenditure is good for the Reserve Bank, good for the economy, because it helps us in our monetary policy. I think the other thing that I would like to add is that when you look at the total borrowing under this for the last 7 years, the government had borrowed 950 million. So we're not saying debt has not increased, we're saying debt has increased. But it spent close to $2.8 billion in capital expenditure over the last 7 years. Of that 2.8, it only borrowed $950 million. When you compare the comparable 7-year period just before that, in 2006, total capital expenditure was just 1.4 billion. The total debt increased by 1.5 billion. So debt increased more.
So there was more borrowing.
Yes.
Where was the money going then?
Well, most of the money, as I said, 1.4 billion went to capital expenditure. The other important thing is, so had this in the last 7 years, had the government spent only 1.4 billion in capital expenditure instead of 2.4, they would have actually repaid debt by approximately $400 million. So debt levels would have come down from 2.8 to about 2.4 billion from 2006 to 2013.
Mm-hmm. There is a system, procedure and formula that is used, and policies that are used when the government decides to borrow. Where do we usually borrow from? Is it that we owe a lot of money outside of Fiji?
When we do the, if people were to study the composition of our debt, where do we borrow from? Bulk of the borrowing that government does is domestic. We borrow from we normally go to tender and then ask for institutions to put in their bid. And it's those borrowing are financed by the Fiji National Provident Fund, by the banks, by the insurance companies, and some individuals also express interest to buy government bond. And so between the two, over 77% would be borrowed domestically. About 23% or so is being financed from external sources. And these external sources, who are they? We have the Asian Development Bank, we have the China Exim Bank, we also have the Malaysian Exim Bank, and I think there are a few other small investment groups. And apart from the 250 million global bond that we issued, and those are held by investors, companies, institutions. So those are that's the breakdown of the debt that we have. It's not only China, which is sometimes being referred to, and when people say we may be sold to China. No, there are other agencies, but overall they comprise about 23% of the debt that we have. And that's why the fact that we hold more domestically also provides cushion for us in terms of exchange rate fluctuations or interest rate fluctuations in foreign reserve. So that also helps us to buffer our economy, the fact that we have more of those debt domestically.
And how safe are these bonds that's issued?
These bonds, we pride on the fact that Fiji has never defaulted in any of its financial obligations, including debt repayments. And then that is what, during when we went on a roadshow to market our global bond of 250 million, that was one attractive element about Fiji's bond, in which we marked the fact that even during trying times that we have been through, whether it's natural disasters or other crises, we have never defaulted on our debt, meaning we always pay our debt in full and on time. And that's why we can bank on the fact that when we issue a government paper, we will meet the obligations that comes with it. So the government papers are safe, and we've always paid on time. And as I said, even for the global bond of US 250 million, we are already building up a sinking fund abroad towards the repayment of that.
Mm-hmm. As we grow to draw closer to the end of the show, I'm interested to know if we have any published reports on the cost of living in Fiji. Does the Finance Ministry have any reports on this? Has it been increasing?
From the Ministry of Finance, we don't have that report of cost of living. But there are other indicators that people can look at to indicate what the costs are likely to be. One of which was mentioned earlier, the inflation rate, where it is right now, and it is low. And the other social programs that government has brought in to dampen or to address the increase in cost in prices, and to help support the targeted areas that are under the social welfare scheme, to help them meet the day-to-day living requirements. Those are other areas that we can look at to try and address the cost issues. And I may also say that from FERCA side, our objective has always been to facilitate the private sector expense, and we address certain rules, certain fees and charges and requirements, with the hope that when we reform those, then the cost of operation is reduced, and they will therefore pass those to the cost of their products, and it reduces the cost of living as well. So we are looking at other reform areas to try and address this, but as to whether we have a cost of living report from the Ministry of Finance, we do not have that, but other institutions may have. Our statistics office may have those, but we have indicators that we use, and also partial indicators that we can refer to.
What do the partial indicators say? Do you have an estimate? Is it really high?
No, the response to the cost of living right now, it varies. People say it's high on one hand, some may say it's high, others may say it is low. That's why I always refer to the macro policies that we have brought in to try and address the factor about cost. One is the reduction, the increase in the threshold for paying taxes from 8 to 16. Now that allows a lot of people below that not to pay tax. So they can then, so it's a choice then for them what they buy, whether they buy imported good that is a bit expensive, or a locally made one, which is also good quality but less cost. And when we do buy those local made ones, we support our export or support our local industry. So at the end of the day, it's a choice for the consumers. But government will try and create that environment where, in the hope that it would then address the cost. And that's why we're working on, we have seen now ease of doing business element. There are certain reforms that needs to be done both at government level and at local government level. Certain requirements on licensing fees, other costs, other charges. We may need to reform those, and we are working on those areas with hope that at the end of it, overall, apart from the social welfare, the tax, the reforms on fees and charges, holistically then we'll be able to keep the cost of living in Fiji low, because most of the costs that we incur, as has been stated by this forum, bulk of it is also imported from abroad. I think we import 60 or 65% of everything that we consume comes from abroad. And if the prices are high, manufacturing and other factors loaded in, it would land here at a higher rate. And that's when the policies of government will then have to come in, some of which I've outlined before, to try and keep it low. And that's how we've addressed the cost of living. But people will still have their perception, and at the end of the day, it's a choice issue, whether you go for fancy brands, high cost ones, or the affordable local one.
All right. Well, on that note, it's time to wrap up the show. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here with us. And I'm confident that the discussions today have been very beneficial to our viewers. That was For the Record tonight. We'll be back again next Sunday with more discussions and more interesting guests. I'm your host, Edwin Nand. We hope to have Pedeli back again for the next show. Good evening.